Okay, so this is lesson number 5 of the Traditional Music from Shetland series. My name is Jenna Reid, and I've been taking you through some of the traditional and contemporary music from Shetland, where I'm originally from. This next tune that we're going to do is a slow air. It's very different to the rest of the tunes we've done in the series. So far we've covered traditional jigs and contemporary jigs and reels, and the slow air is very different to that, obviously, as it's a performance piece as opposed to music for dancing or music to be played in a set with other tunes, for instance. So the slow air is very different in how you approach it, as it's a listening piece. It's very, very popular at home in Shetland, and that alongside the reel really sort of would describe the Shetland fiddle tradition very well. From its traditional to its contemporary, the slow air and the reel have remained very, very strong within the music of Shetland. And my teacher, Willie Hunter, was a great slow air player, and he's passed on the sort of passion and love of this type of tune to me and a lot of all of the rest of his pupils. And we're going to do one of his tunes in particular, because he was such a great composer and player, especially of slow airs. We're going to do one of his called The Love of the Isles, and it's a tune in the key of D, and the key of slow airs vary very much so from the sharp keys, all the sharp keys, D, G, A, right through to the flat keys, F, B flat, E flat, and things like that. And every one of those keys are lovely keys to play slow airs in, as they take different qualities from the fiddle, and they suit the type of tune that it's written, the type of key that it's written in. So we're going to do one in the key of D, and we therefore won't have to worry about changing into the flat keys and then practicing scales to correspond with those keys. So we're staying in the major of D, and this is a slow air which has two parts, A part and a B part. And what I'll do is I'll take you through it slowly. I'll play the tune once through so you can hear how it goes and where the melody is going, and then we'll break it up into small phrases so you can learn it. Now, at the moment we're going to learn this tune in first position, as we do with all tunes. This is the easiest way to begin learning a slow air, as with any tune, as we can just focus on the basic notes and the tuning for now before we move into any realms of working in positions. So as I said, we're going to start off and just play through the tune. Before we do that, make sure our fiddle is in tune. So let's start with our A, and the D, G, and then the E string. Okay, so I'll play this tune for you. It begins with an upbeat again, and I'll play it for you and you can have a listen and see where the melody goes. So that's the basic frame of the tune, the two parts. There's quite a few main things to remember about when playing a slow air. Basically, from the start to the finish, we have to create a curve of music that moves up and down, and basically this sort of curve needs to be continuous, and as soon as that's broken, it's almost like you've lost your audience who were drawn into what you've played. And it's very, very important to keep this continuous line moving through its louds and softs and its ups and downs through the tune. This has to remain continuous. I'll give you an example of what would happen if we broke this this sort of line of music, if you like. So that's just an example of playing it slightly more disjointed. I was exaggerating it there, but just so you get the idea of what I'm getting towards, you have to make sure one note moves into the next completely seamlessly, regardless whether you're moving from a loud section to a quiet section, or whether or not you're moving from up here to down here. This has to be done with seamless accuracy, and this is what is needed to really, really deliver a slow air, in my opinion, to a high level. So that is the first thing that's very important, and it's important to understand before we start that this is what the kind of sound is that we're aiming for. The other thing which is very important, and this is what shapes what I've just talked about, is how we use our bow. I've spoken about it in earlier tunes, that using from the heel to the tip is the best way to use the bow. That's the reason that we've been given a bow of this length, and you've got so much room to create a good tone and a good sound. When we're playing a slow air, the bow is going to move at different speeds throughout it. I'll give you an example of that. At the end, I was trying to conserve as much bow as possible, and without being too slow, I was pulling the bow and trying to make it last as long as possible, to hold that last note on as long as possible, to keep your audience listening on the edge of their seat for as long. And as soon as you stop that note, if it's stopped too early, then it's almost like the tune came to a close prematurely. So I'll just show you what I mean by that. So I'll play the end of the tune. Now that is an example of racing through the bow too quickly, and as we come to the end of the tune, it's finished and it's quite abrupt, that end, and I'll just show you it again. There's nothing wrong with the note, it's in tune. Everything that this hand is doing is right, but this is where the music is shaped from, what our bow is doing. So in order to try and change that, let's change the speed that the bow is travelling and really slow it down, and just bring out the ending to a nice finish. And I'll just demonstrate what I mean by that. And if you wanted, you could take it even slower than that and really bring it out. But that was using right from the tip, the heel rather, right to the tip of the bow, and that is where the technique of your bow comes in. So just to make sure that you understand that it's going to be moving at different speeds throughout the tune to create different effects. So let's press on and see how much of the tune we can learn before we start adding in the bow work. And within that first time around, I also added in bits of third position. Now, third position basically means that we're replacing our third finger with our first, And likewise, if you were using fourth position, which we're not going to, so don't worry, fourth position, you'd be replacing your fourth finger with your first. So for now though, we just need to worry about the tune and get the notes. I will say quickly though, the reason that we do use, or the reason I do use little bits of third position, it's not for fanciness or to show off in any way or to make it look fancy. It's basically just to use another note where an open string or a crossing with the bow might be a little bit untidy or a bit brash sounding. So if the only reason I've used instead of is, well, you can hear the difference between them. That's much too brash sounding for a slow air. And it's softer if we play it in third position. So techniques like that I'll explain as we go along. So let's start with the tune, an upbeat to start it, which will slur two notes together on an up bow, starting with F and going to E. And that one again. Once more. The next phrase. Followed by those two little quick notes. And then the next phrase. And again that one. And all that happens now is the first one is repeated again. Slightly different ending on the second time through there. Okay, so let's just go around that again, the same part again, from the beginning then. That's it. All that happens now is the same part is repeated and we're going to put a new ending on it before we lead into the second half. Let me just show you how that goes now. So that's the ending of the whole first half. So we're just going to go up to the high D. Okay, so let's have a recap and play over that, and then we can chat about it and see what we've done to embellish that first half. so that's the first half of the notes that we've gone over. Let's do a little bit of work on those notes now. As you can probably notice, there's quite a lot of open strings popping in and out of this first half. The A isn't such an obvious open string, and if necessary you can leave it as an open string if you want. However, this same pattern and so on is coming up quite a lot of times. By the time we've got to the end of the first half, we've played that little tiny section quite a few times. So let's change it, not for the reason that the open A doesn't sound very good, but let's change it to get a difference in texture, just to turn the note slightly differently, because we're coming back up against the same recurring pattern. And because this is a performance tune, you need to keep your listeners very much in tune with what you're doing and keep them excited and just interested in what you're doing and which way you're moving. So the first time it would be fine, just leave the A as it is. Now this time around, let's change it. We're going to move up to our second finger up on the D string. And you can check whether you're in tune by looking up to your A string. Now it's exactly the same note, but it's got a far warmer tone. So it's a tricky shift in that it's the same finger that's moving from the F sharp to the A. So we need to be very definite about where the finger is going. And you might want to just practice that on its own for a while, so you get used to knowing exactly where your finger is moving to. So I'll play through what we're going to do with that section. Now adding in a little ornament there. So all I'm doing is F sharp, E, D, and back to E. That's it slowed down. And then speed it up. And carrying on. Up to third. Here's a place where we can add in another little bit of third position, again with the second finger, and we're making a D. So on the G string, okay, so towards the end of that first half, remembering that we're going to finish up here. Okay, let me play through the first half and in one or two of the ideas that we've spoken about so far. So, from the beginning then. So that brings us to the end of the first half. On the repeat that I played there, you might have noticed that I moved the pace along just ever so slightly. It's very important to keep an eye on the pulse when you're playing. A slow air doesn't mean that it's incredibly slow, that it has no pulse. My teacher always told me to just tap the inside of my shoe with my toe just to make sure there was a pulse to it, or else you'll have people sort of just drifting away from what you're playing. And on the repeat of that, the first time through the tune we've stated what the tune is, and we've not added any third position or much position work at all, but on the repeat of that we want to move the tune along and add in a little bit of third position that we did with our making our A and making our D, and that gives it a little bit more momentum, and that's where we're going to move with a slightly faster bow. Okay, so the opening phrases of a slow air is probably when it's going to be its slowest. You're just creating an atmosphere, stating the tune, and as it moves on through the repeated section of the first half, you want to build into that, whether it's dynamically or with third position work if necessary. It might not be necessary at all. Otherwise you would use louds and softs to build on that first half of the tune. And moving on now, we're going to look at the second half and what we're going to do with that. So we've landed on a third finger, a high D, to end this first half. Now, the following phrase is this. Now, there's a couple of times where we're hitting an open E string there. Now, it doesn't sound too bad at all because we're still in the movement and we're keeping the tune going along. That E can be easily brushed over with good crossing over technique, and it doesn't stick out too much. So that is possible. I'll just play it for you. So that's fine. If you wanted an alternative to that, you could do this. So finishing the first half. First position. Now what I did there was, I did exactly what the explanation of third position is. I changed my third finger for my first. And I'm using the D string, an open D string, as a way of moving back down to first position. So it's quite a good way to get your hand back down to first position to use an open string to do that. So that's one alternative, but if we want to stick to just using first position just now, which is just as good in this area of the tune, so that's the notes. Let's go over it one more time. Second little phrase. Let's move up to third position there. So it's quite a long note and probably too long to stay on an open E. So let's go over those notes again. Here's where we can stay up and using the open D. Now that's what another mechanism, because we ended up on an E up here. We can stay where we are, as it's much cleaner to stay within that area than to try and make a messy move back down to first position. So let's go over again those notes so far in the second half. And staying up. Section gets repeated. And up again. Okay, just like we did before. Now we're going to add in the ending. And we've got to this open E. And it's an open A we're going to, so it's a very easy change. Okay, so we're going to go over that ending again. So we're coming from the third position E, down to open A. Let's do that one more time from the third position. Using a third position to make a D instead of going to an open D. So those last few notes are all in one bow. And try and make that note go on for as long as you can. Okay, so that's a very quick demonstration of a slow air. We're going to go over the whole tune now, and where necessary I'll point out the different things that we spoke about so far. So from the beginning then, 2 up bows slurred together for our upbeat. staying there. And using this as a way to get down. And the repeat of the second half. Down to open A. Okay, so that's just a few pointers towards what you do in a slow air, and hopefully that's been of some help for you. And obviously it's the sort of tune that you could talk about and for quite a lot more time and do more work on, but that's a very good basis for just now. And so all the things that we spoke about there, third position work, the speed that our bow is travelling at, position work only to avoid horrible open strings if they are so, and if they need slightly sweeter or kind of rounder tone, you'd go for the third position, and keeping an even phrase throughout the whole tune, so the changing from note to note on bow to bow is seamless, or as seamless as possible. And those are the main things to look out for in a slow air.